En el salón estamos listos para la siguiente presentación. Así que vamos a darle la bienvenida. Él nos va a presentar el tema de comprensión del comportamiento humano para fortalecer la cultura ética y el cumplimiento. Así que por favor, demos un gran aplauso para recibir en este escenario al señor Adam Turtletaub.
Muchas gracias. Puedo hablar español un poco, pero tengo miedo. Y por eso voy a usar inglés. This presentation is a little bit different from the other ones that you've seen. It's much more about human behavior and understanding how people think and don't think and how they make decisions so that you can get a better understanding of the people you're working with. There's an interactive element to this presentation. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to stand up or dance or anything. But please do respond, and one of the things I'll say about that is sometimes you may be wrong when I ask a question, and that's good because it makes the point that I'm trying to make. So if you're wrong, just turn to the person next to you and say, I know the right answer, I was just trying to help Adam, okay? Thank you. So I'm Adam Turtletaub. I work for the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and Healthcare Compliance Association. In case you're not familiar, do we have any members here? We're a membership association with about 19,000 compliance professionals around the world. So today we're going to be talking and addressing some of our assumptions about the ways people think and what the actual reality is. So our general assumption is that the people we work with are basically rational people. If we teach them as something is bad, then they're less likely to do it. That's something that Lynn talked about in the first presentation of the day. If people thought about what they were doing, they wouldn't do bad things. And people basically are ethical, but sometimes they get led astray, either by their own tendencies or the people that they work with. But the big questions I'm going to ask today is, what if we're wrong? And I don't mean a little wrong, but very wrong in how we think about the people we work with and the people we know. What if in our hearts we're all a bunch of cheaters? And there's some interesting data that shows we are. And what if people really don't think that much, that they operate a lot more automatically than they think they do? And finally, what if we're worse at thinking than we think we are at thinking? So let me tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how we think and how we don't, how much we cheat when we can, and I know it's what people in this room deal with for a living, but there is a lot of cheating by a lot of people in a lot of different areas. What Jimmy Fallon, does they show the Jimmy Fallon show in Mexico? Yeah, okay. What Jimmy Fallon understands about our ethical decisions that we don't, and Jimmy Fallon, it turns out, ran a very interesting social experiment. Why I'm never wrong and neither are you unless you disagree with me. Okay? Now, when it comes to our brain, we have a perception that our brains are these fluid machines, that all the data that we see around us comes in through our eyes, the things we hear come through our ears. We think about this, we process this, and out comes a conclusion, and it all happens very smoothly. The reality is our brains are less of an automatic machine than we think, and much more like a stick shift in a car. Or, as we say these days, a device to protect your car from getting stolen by anyone under 40, because nobody under 40 can use a stick shift anymore. The reality is our brain has to shift gears, and it doesn't do that as well as we tend to think it does, or as fluidly as we think. And I'm going to give you a little experiment. This is the participation part. And what I'm going to ask you to do is first, I'm going to give you a pattern for clapping. And I want you to start clapping and keep clapping until I tell you to stop. And then I'm going to ask you some questions while you're clapping, okay? So here's what I want everyone to do. Wait, sorry. Okay. It's a pattern. Okay? All right. Okay, keep clapping. All right, now, I'm going to show you a picture of me. And when you see the picture, I want you to keep clapping, but shout. How am I feeling, okay? Happy, right. Okay, now here's another one. How am I feeling? Angry, right. Okay. Next question, what's the answer? Okay, stop. Okay. So, did you notice it got a lot harder? Your clapping started slowing down. It's not a very complicated math question for a bunch of internal auditors to do. For ethics officers, maybe, but for compliance auditors, no. So what happened? What happened is your brain switched. You had to switch from your intuitive brain, the brain that instantly can tell if someone's glad to see you or angry with you, to your thinking brain that does math problems. When that happens, it takes longer for your brain to process information. It took you notice how quickly you could say angry or happy, but how long it took you to do the answer in a not very difficult math problem? Also, it takes more of the brain's resources. Your brain is like a computer. It can only do so much at once. And so it suddenly got a lot harder. I don't know if you heard, the clapping started to slow down almost immediately. And that's why everything, in fact, did slow down, is because your brain kept thinking, going back to the clapping, thinking, going back. It was harder. You can see this a lot in the course of your everyday life. When you go to park your car in parallel park, and you've got to look behind you and turn, and if you're talking to someone, do you ever notice your conversation slows down? And by the way, research shows that people in the car with you who drive naturally stop or slow down their talking, because in their own head, subconsciously, they know you're too busy thinking about driving. You can also see that when you give someone shocking news. You're walking down the street with your friend, everything's fine, you tell them shocking, and they stop. Now, that's a little dramatic, but it's also the reflection of, if you tell people something that's surprising, then they will, in fact, stop walking, because something even that simple gets to be a little bit hard, because the brain is so preoccupied. And I think the best example is, somebody's emailing. Everybody thinks that when they're emailing, they can have a conversation. But we all know what happens. You're talking to someone who's emailing, and they're like, What did you say? Your brain can't do it. Somebody said it best, multitasking is another way of saying I'm going to do a lot of things badly at the same time. Okay? So what's going on? Well, scientific research has shown there are two modes of thinking. And by the way, this takes a lot from Daniel Kahneman, who we heard about earlier in Matt's presentation. System one is when your brain works automatically and quickly. It's all the things that take minimal effort to do, like being able to tell if someone is happy or sad. It's how we spend most of our lives. Most of our lives, we're not making complex decisions. We're just going about things automatically. System two is thinking that requires greater resources and greater resources. The brain only switches to it when it has to, and that's called the law of least effort. Why does the brain do it? Well, think about our ancestors 20, 30,000 years ago. If they stopped to think and they were concentrating a lot, they couldn't hear the lion, and they got eaten. So your brain doesn't like to get that engrossed in things unless it absolutely has to. The problems are, one, because system two was very resource intensive, our brains try to avoid it. We try and make decisions as quickly as possible and as simply as possible. Two, we make mistakes when we think of something as being a system one issue, something very simple, when it's actually much more complicated than that. And when we think of ourselves, we think of the system two person, the person who makes the complicated thoughts, when in reality, that's not who we are. We're the other person who's making the quick and easy decisions. Compliance tends to be a system two issue. When you look at what compliance is, when you look at all your systems for what is permissible under policies, it's complex. It requires complex thinking. So we're asking people to stop, use your system 2 brain, not your system 1 brain. And that causes problems. So I'm going to give you a quick example. And I know you're internal auditors and you know math well, but shout out your answer, the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay? A baseball bat and a baseball cost $110 together. The bat costs $100 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Right. Wrong. Okay? That's the easy answer. That's a good system 1 answer. But, sorry, if a bat and ball cost $110, the bat costs $100 more than the ball, it's actually $5 for the ball and $105 for the bat. And that's what equals 110. If the bat's $10 more than the ball, you pay $10 for the ball, you're paying $120. So system 2 is the only one that can follow rules and make deliberate choices between options. And all this comes from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which, again, Matt referred to some of his other research. Daniel Kahneman, by the way, is a very interesting man. He has a Nobel Prize in economics, and he's actually a psychologist. He's the father of behavioral economics, which has been very revolutionary. Now, there's a lot of problems with System 2, despite the fact that it helps us make better decisions. We don't use it when we should, as I pointed out before. And also, the more you are thinking, the more likely you are to make selfish choices, use sexist language, and make superficial judgments. Why? Your brain is so busy thinking about these complex things. Other stuff, it just makes fast decisions to get them out of the way. And that's what ends up leading to all of these kinds of decisions. This, by the way, is my favorite slide, because one day I want to eat this cake. It also leads to problems, and there's a related one called ego depletion that says the more you say no in one area, the harder it is to say no in another. Every parent knows that when your kid is unrelenting, asking you, Daddy, can I have this? Daddy, can I have that? Daddy, can I do this? And you have to keep saying no. Sooner or later, you're going to give in just because you're suffering from ego depletion. It's also why, it's nighttime, you're working late, the whole team is there working late, and somebody says, let's get dinner. And no one says, oh, good. I'll order us some salads, and we'll skip the dressing, and we'll just squeeze some lemon on top, because that's healthier. No, you order pizza. You order indulgent foods. You order cookies and cakes like this to help us get through it. Cognitive labor produces the same reaction. The more you think, the harder it is for you to resist temptation in your life. Now, another example of how this affects decision-making is, believe it or not, how long people stay in prison. So Israel has a parole system. Does Mexico have a parole system too, where you can get less prison time if you've shown good behavior and stuff? And Kahneman and other researchers were curious why some people get released from prison early and some stay in prison longer. And so they looked at a large number of factors to see what might affect it. Is it, when are you most likely to get it? Is it after serving half your sentence, maybe after your second parole hearing? I jokingly put in after lunch, or after a milestone birthday. The truth is, the right answer was actually after lunch and first thing in the morning. If your case came up early, you were much more likely to get paroled than if it came up right before lunch or at the end of the day. Because at that point, people were suffering from ego depletion. They were tired, they didn't want to deal with it, and it was just easier to say no. So by the way, what they ended up doing there is they broke up the parole sessions so people would stay fresher longer and it would be fairer to the prisoners. So the bottom line is, if you're wondering what they were thinking, they probably weren't. Or more accurately, they were thinking as hard as they thought, which is they were thinking it was a System 1 issue, because their brain didn't think it needed to. They were too busy, too tired, or too tired of saying no. But aren't people basically honest anyway? this is the sad part of the presentation. If you make it through this, you'll be okay, okay? And I will show you at the end that there is some hope for the world. So the popular theory is that most people are basically good. Scandals are generally the result of a few bad actors, sometimes called rogue employees. And then Dan Ariely put that theory to a test. And what he did was he created a series of math problems. People would be given a worksheet with a bunch of math problems. They were given 5 minutes to solve as many as they could. Then what they would have to do is come to the front of the room. Someone would take a look at their answers, score it, and pay them 50 cents. And by the way, only students, university students is what they did this with, because they're the only people who work for 50 cents. And then they were told to show their answers, they get graded, there was no opportunity to cheat, and on average in 5 minutes, somebody could get 4 right. Then he put a shredder in the room, and what he told them to do is, gave them the number of answers, they were able to correct their own answers, put the thing in a shredder, come to the front of the room, and tell how many they got right. And what happened? Suddenly they were getting 6 right. And he knows they were cheating because the shredder was devised so it only shredded the edges of the paper, the middle was left untouched. So he could see what was going on. So not content with that, he tried some other experiments. One took on a popular theory that if there's more money at stake, people are willing to cheat more because it's their more interest. So he started doing that same shredder test, but the rewards varied. Some was $1 for right answer, $2 and $5. What effect did it have on cheating? Absolutely none. It stayed at 6. And when he increased it to $10, he saw a slight decline in the amount of cheating. And he thinks it's because people started feeling a little guilty about that much money. So people, bottom line, and this is the first piece of learning, don't cheat more if they're offered more. They cheat about as much as they can, but still feel good about themselves, still be able to rationalize their decision, okay? And you know the old saying that a rationale is a reason for doing something, a rationalization is the reason why you then said you did something afterwards. So Dan Ariely then went and did some other exam tests. He told one group that the average number of correct answers was 4, and another group he told them the average number of correct answers was 8, wondering if he could sort of prime them and you would get different outcomes. How many did the people told 8 cheat by? 2. Once again, was the average. It didn't affect things. Then he did another interesting experiment with tokens, and telling people, again, same test, opportunity to cheat, but instead of saying, we'll pay you right away, instead, he said, bring it to the first person, and they're going to look at your test, or you'll tell them how many you got right, and instead of paying you right then and there, they just gave people a token. And then they had to walk 4 meters over to the side to another desk, and they handed those tokens to somebody else who then paid them. So he separated the cheating from the money a little bit. So what happened? Cheating doubled. The cheating doubled because it was separated a bit from the money. Why? Probably, and I'll talk about it more, is again, they weren't cheating for the money, it was a thing. It's also, I think, probably, and I'll talk about this too later, is why it's easier for people to steal pens from the office than it is to steal petty cash, because it's not money, it's a thing. He also got interested in counterfeit sunglasses. He was talking to the people who make he was talking about and fascinated by the fact that people will spend hundreds of dollars for a pair of sunglasses, but also people will buy fake sunglasses. So what he did was he gave 2 women an experiment. Half of them were told they were testing designer glasses, and they were actually testing real Chloe, is a very expensive sunglass line I learned. My sunglasses come from China, so I don't know. The other group were told that they were testing counterfeit eyeglasses. And by the way, they were actually testing real Chloe sunglasses. After he did a series of questions, asked them what they thought about these glasses, then he said, wait, I want to do one more experiment. And he gave them the math problems again, curious to see what would happen after people had cheated in one area. What did he find? 30% of the people who were told the glasses were real cheated, but 70% who were told that they were fake cheated on the test. So we see when people give permission to cheat in one area, they feel it in the other. So what if we were to give people moral reminders? He did an experiment where he told a bunch of students to recall as many of the 10 Commandments as they could and write them down on a piece of paper. And by the way, the average number was 7. And then he gave them the shredding test. Nobody cheated. And so obviously, on a practical level, in a workplace, you can't ask people to write down the 10 Commandments multiple times during the day. So he was trying to see other things that would affect. So he asked a bunch of kids, he was at MIT at the time, to sign that attestation that they understand that this research comports with the MIT Honor Code. Once again, there was no cheating, even though MIT does not have an honor code, and even though these were MIT students who should have known that there wasn't an honor code there. So moral reminders, he found out, had a strong impact. But he also found out it didn't necessarily last that long. So he went to Princeton University, which their mascot is the tiger. And they have a very formal and strong honor code. When you're a freshman at Princeton, it's part of your orientation. You're taught all about it. People were then tested 2 weeks after orientation using his testing, and they cheated just as much as anyone else, except when they were reminded of the code immediately before the experiment. So that's the depressing part. You made it. Congratulations. Now we're going to talk about another theory, or as I call it, the Michael Jackson and Jackson 5 test from the old song, "One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch, girl." So we did a new shredder test, and these times he tried to see if one person leading people on could affect the results. So the control group was told, score the test yourself, take some money from the envelope, take the money from the envelope based on how many answers you got right, and your answers would be checked. The second group was told just shred it, take as many dollars out as you got right answers. And then the next test, he told people, he had somebody who he had paid to be in the room who obviously cheated. Obviously, and in front of everyone, cheated on the test to see what would happen. And what he found was the control group said they got 7 answers right, was found to get 7 answers right. The basic sort of standard cheating test, people lied in this group and said they got 12 answers, and those with a person who was obviously cheating claimed even more. They saw somebody was getting away with it, so they cheated even more. He also tried to see if what shirt somebody was wearing would affect behavior. So what he did was he went to Pittsburgh, where there are two universities that are arch rivals of each other, Carnegie Mellon and Pitt. And what he did was have somebody get up and basically say, well, if you're going to shred the answers, I can put down whatever I want. You'd never know. And the proctor says yes, to see what impact that would have. Well, it turned out what kind of shirt the person was wearing had a huge impact. So at Carnegie Mellon, if the person who says that and got up and says, I can cheat and get away with it, was wearing a Carnegie Mellon shirt, cheating went up. Because people saw one of their own cheating and getting away with it. If that same person in another group was wearing a Pitt shirt, cheating went down. Because people don't want to be like that person to begin with, and now they see the person cheating, so it made them more moral in their behavior. Now, there's also a problem we have and a gap in ethics, or why we don't do what we say we'll do. So there was a talk earlier about Netflix, and I'm going to go back to that. At the height of the DVD business, when we would all get DVDs in the mail, people would rent a wide range of films. So here's one to raise your hand. Which DVDs on average do you think people held on to and kept the longest before returning? Artsy films and documentaries, or action films? How many say art films? Nobody wants to raise their hand. You're the only one. Okay. How many people said the action films stayed out the longest? You're the only one who was right. Why? People rent art films because they think they're supposed to watch it, and they don't want to. So they just hold on to it and never get around to watching it, or they eventually do and return it, or they just finally give up. Action films people want to see, and they do, which speaks a lot to ethics decision. If it's something you don't want to do, you put it off as long as possible versus something you want to do, and you do it right away. The problem with ethics is it tends to come and go. Before an event and in the abstract, we tend to think, I'll do what I should. I'm an ethical, good person. At the time of the incident, you do what needs to be done, and afterwards, you rationalize why you did it. And sometimes there was a good reason, and sometimes not a good reason that you're trying to make up. Now, Jimmy Fallon did a great experiment that showed how people understood this, or behaved in reality when it came to an issue of morality. Who wants to see the video? Yeah, me too. But I called NBC. Because I work in compliance, I can't just put up a YouTube video. I have to make sure it's right. And NBC said $26,000 just to show this clip. So in the presentation, there is a link to where you can watch the video. So what he did was pretty funny. He made a giant box that had a big picture of the baseball player Robinson Cano on it. Robinson Cano is a Dominican player. He had played for the Yankees for a lot of years. He became a free agent and went to Seattle. And on the day he was coming back to New York for the first time as a Seattle Mariner, he set up this box in a big park, and one of his producers would stop New Yorkers on the street, and this would be the conversation. Are you a Yankees fan? Oh yeah, I'm a huge Yankees fan. Are you going to boo Robinson Cano when he plays today? Oh yeah, I'm going to boo him like crazy. He says, okay, go over there and boo Robinson Cano. So they walk over to the picture and they say, boo, I hate you, you're no good, all you care about is money, I want nothing to do with you. And then they turn around and the producer says, that was good, go boo him again. And they turn around and Robinson Cano is right there. And suddenly, what do the people do? Hey, Robbie, good to see you again. Or one guy apologizes and says, hey, about what I just said, I'm sorry. So what's interesting to see is how we act. What is our moral position in the abstract versus what it is when we're face to face with someone who we think has made the wrong decision and has erred ethically. It's much easier to say I'm going to condemn the person than when I'm standing there and the person is right there. So given that, ask yourself a few questions. One, do I ask employees if they should report wrongdoing, which you probably in your organization do? Do I ask them if they would tell someone to stop doing something wrong, which you probably expect them to do, but do you still believe their answers? And after you watch this video, hopefully tonight, you'll see it and realize there is this just enormous gap. And it's very funny when you watch it on TV, but when you think about what that means for your organization, it's very different. So how do you increase wrongdoing? Well, one, there's a lot of research shows that you put people in a group, they're more likely to do things wrong because there's a diffusion of moral responsibility. I'm not necessarily as responsible because I was only a part of the group and others were doing other things. If they're told by a trusted authority or business leader, you should do something wrong. When people take the very first small step of doing something wrong, when they steal the box of pencils and nobody cares, leads to other things. And then when people feel anonymous, when they think no one will be able to know it was them, they're much more likely to do things wrong. It also tends to stem from the fact that how we feel about ourselves changes over time when we do things wrong. Research shows that people, when they lie, feel actual pain from it. But after time, the more they do, the more they get used to it. It hurts less. And that's why little lies can lead to big ones. And it's obviously an argument for why you need to address minor infractions, not just the major infractions at organizations. Now here's a question. When do you think people are more willing to come forward when they see something wrong? When they're alone or with others? How many say alone? How many say with others? So the answer is mostly alone. Because when others are around, other than when it's a group of close friends seeing somebody outside the friends group something, people tend to wait to see what others do. And they looked around them to see, well, are other people saying anything about this? Am I the only one who thinks this is wrong? Versus when you're alone, where it's only your moral equation to take a look at. What's interesting is people don't realize others might also be waiting to see what you're doing. How are you reacting to this situation? They also feel less responsible because there's a whole group here, and why am I responsible if there's other people there? And they also don't want to feel embarrassed. I think at one time in all of our lives, we walked up to someone and think they were choking or think there was something wrong, and the person's fine and you feel embarrassed about that. The same thing happens when seeing wrongdoing takes place. So, as Catherine Sanderson writes in her book, the chance that a victim will receive help is inversely related to the number of people present. And by the way, she differentiates between people like saving a life of someone choking versus seeing something wrong. One takes physical bravery. There's no moral equation to that versus the one in your workplace where there is a moral equation. The other problem this ties into is when it comes to thinking, we tend to think we know what others are thinking, but we don't. A great example of it is you're at the university, the professor gives a lecture, you're totally confused at the end of it, and he says, raise your hand if you have any questions, and you have a million questions, and you're about to raise your hand, and you look around the room and realize nobody else is raising their hand. And you start to think, am I the only idiot here? Does everyone else get it but me? It never dawns on us that everybody else in the room is thinking, am I the only idiot here? Does everybody get this but me? We tend to assume others understand things better than they necessarily do. We also have a problem with our love of being right, even when we're wrong about things. We talk about how we feel certain about things, okay? The problem is certainty isn't a fact, it's a feeling. Remember, we say, I feel certain. And how do we do that? Well, first we sort of know it intuitively, then we try and find the facts to support that decision. A lot of times we don't start with the facts and then arrive at the feeling of certainty. We start with, I'm certain about this thing, and then we go back to find the facts to support the argument. Stephen Colbert had a great thing, he used to talk about truthiness, which is the quality of seeming or being felt to be true, even if it's not necessarily true. And it's a great summarization of this. And by the way, it's now in the dictionary. You can look up the word truthiness. It's actually crossed over. The problem is when it comes to thinking, remember I talked before about when you lie and you start with a little one and it's just the drip, but the more you do it, the more it gets. Well, that's the way knowledge works in our brains too. What happens is the more we think about things, the more we consider them, the more we see the world around us, our brain starts forming these networks which tie thoughts together. And in many ways, it's like a river. It starts out with a trickle, it gets to be a stream, and over time becomes a river that's deeper and deeper over time. And a river, as you know, is very hard to move, right? It doesn't jump its banks and start a brand new river. It's the same thing with our brain. Our brains form rivers of thought that don't like to be moved. It's why it's very hard to change people's minds. It's also why, as we go through life, they find that people have open minds until they make a decision, and then it's virtually impossible to change people's minds. We can see also that our moral equation changes over time based on what position we're in. And I think the best example of that is a crosswalk. You're driving your car and you come up to a crosswalk and you see the person standing there. And the question is, do I go through the intersection or do I stop? When you're driving the car, you can think of a million reasons why you shouldn't stop. They're not stepping off the curb, they're looking at their phone, They don't seem like they're going to rush. That's okay. I'm already this far into the intersection. And it also seems as if everyone who crosses the street like this, right? Everybody seems as if they're the slowest people in the world, and they're probably on their phone, and you want to make a law that says it's not legal to use your phone on the street. Then you park your car, and now you have to cross that same street. Suddenly, you're the king of the intersection. And it always feels as if you're the one walking like this, right? When in reality, you probably were the one walking like this. Because that's how it is. Our moral equation changes by whether or not something is ethical and is convenient for us or not. All right, so what does this all mean for us, our compliance programs, and all of our efforts? First of all, to sum up, one, we don't think as much as we should or think. A lot of times, we and our colleagues are not thinking. Second, the harder we think, and the harder our colleagues think, and the harder our leadership is thinking, and keep in mind, your leadership is the one with the most risk because they're under the most stress of anyone. And research shows stress is something that negatively affects decision making. The more stressed people are, for example, the more superstitious they are. Anybody here a baseball fan? No? Yeah. If you watch baseball, you can see that every batter has a million little things they have to do because they know they're going to fail 7 out of 10 times. That's why they do it. That's stress. The harder we think, the less forgiving and ruder we get. Why? Because the brain is so busy, we don't have time to be considerate to people. If given the opportunity to cheat, people will take advantage of it. Most people, it's not going to be a lot, but they're going to find ways that they can, in fact, cheat. Larger rewards don't necessarily lead to more cheating. People are willing to cheat for relatively little and relatively a lot, and the fact that it's a lot doesn't necessarily mean anything. Basically, we cheat to the level we can get away with and still feel good about ourselves. That seems to be an inherent part of what the human condition is. Sorry. The more removed from cash, the more likely we are to cheat. Again, that's why stealing a box of pens is easier than putting your hands into the cash drawer. And stealing other things from around the office is easier. A stack of paper, or even, say, a machine is easier. It's also easy, by the way, why it's easy to overstate hours when billing. So anyone in a service business needs to be watchful for that because the people who are billing by the hour find it easier to add an extra hour or two than it would be to just say, pay us X dollars more. We tend to watch to see what happens when others cheat. If we see people get away with it, we generally speaking are willing to cheat more. Moral reminders, so telling people about your code of conduct is great, but it doesn't necessarily last very long. People will tend to forget. We also tend to talk a better game than we play. We say we're moral, we say we'll make the right call in a given situation, but in practice, we don't. And we grow used to our lies. The more we lie, the more comfortable we are with lying, and it makes it easier to lie more. We look to others for cues. We look to see what others around us are doing to see if something is right or wrong, and we misinterpret that. We tend to be too deferential to authority. There's all sorts of research that shows that if someone above you says to do something, has an opinion, you take it much more seriously than someone below you in the hierarchy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that person is right. We tend to ascribe rightness to what they're doing. We think in patterns that deepen over time. We change our ethics to suit our own needs. We do stuff that we think is going to be helpful for us. So, what do we do as professionals in this room to counter all this? Turns out there's a lot. One, figure out where the opportunities to cheat are. Every organization of any size actually has a roadmap for cheating. Do you know what they call it? The incentive plan. Your incentive plan at your organization is basically telling people These are the places you want to cheat to get more money, okay? That for you is a good guide of where there are opportunities to cheat. We need to think about things like keeping codes of conduct, rules, policies in front of people as much as is humanly possible, and remind them of that frequently. So not just the annual training, see if you can find other ways to get in front of them. We have to realize that people with the most demands are the ones most likely to be tempted to stray. Again, they're the ones whose brains are so overwhelmed. They're so deep in system 2, they're making horrible decisions elsewhere. You need to find ways to make contacting compliance and internal audit a system 1 reaction. We've already done that with safety. People don't think twice when there's a safety issue. They report those at work and don't think twice about it. But for some reason, when it comes to other decisions, there is that hesitancy. The other thing, and this is the craziest idea here, is ban counterfeit goods in the workplace. Tell your employees you cannot wear fake designer items to work. Now, I don't think you could do this in practically, but look for statements that say, we don't allow cheating anywhere, and try and communicate that to people. Don't let people stop with feeling right. Make sure they know what is right. Try and work to create systems where people can't just make a quick decision, but have to get in the habit of knowing that they have to be able to explain that decision. That's an area where embracing transparency can be helpful. Teach them also not to assume so much about others. Don't assume you're a mind reader, which is what we tend to do. Is before you decide people agree with you, ask. Ask if they're having these questions. Ask, am I the only one in the room? Lower the costs of standing up for what's right. You know, there are few things worse for your career than being a whistleblower. You know, I remember one of the woman who was the whistleblower for WorldCom, who was an internal auditor who just doing her job and reported all the financial stuff, said that she read a book. The best way you can end up divorced, unemployed, and alcoholic is to become a whistleblower. And we need to figure out ways to try and change that. Try to stop bad behavior when it's small. Obviously, you're avoiding a big problem, but you're getting someone before they cross that line and start feeling okay with making bad decisions and doing those little wrong things before they get to making the really big, bad, life-changing decisions. And then the other thing I encourage all of us to do is learn more about human behavior. We are in the human behavior business. We're not in audit. We are in the position of checking that people are doing what they're supposed to do and understanding why they don't do what they're supposed to do. So this is why this is the only presentation you've probably ever seen that has a bibliography. So let me tell you quickly about some of the books I read, because I didn't know about this stuff. I read one book, which led to another. Dan Ariely's book, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, is a really fun read. It's really enjoyable reading all these experiments that he did. Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational, is also funny. It's about not only are people irrational, but you could figure out where they're going to make irrational decisions. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, I have met 2 people who've actually finished it. But the first 40 or so pages are great and make the argument. You don't need to read the numbers for the experiment. The Invisible Gorilla is a great book. It talks about what we see and what we don't see and what we think we see. The Invisible Gorilla is a very fun experiment where people are told to watch a video. There's one team in black, one team in white, and they're passing a basketball around. And about halfway through, and people are told, count how many times the team in white passes the ball. And halfway through, a man in a gorilla suit walks through, pounds on his chest, and walks off. And statistically, about half the people never see the gorilla. And when they're asked afterwards, they can't believe there was a gorilla. But it shows how when we're concentrating in one area, we miss things in another. Why do we make mistakes? It's about why we make mistakes. On being certain is the certainty issue. Blind spots talks about our own moral and ethical blind spots, and why we act, turning into bystanders, moral rebels, is all about how you get people to act. So that is it, and there's my contact information. I think we have time now for any questions. Those people are probably afraid after I talked about how we make wrong decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Adam Turtletaub. Ok. Vamos con las preguntas. Vamos a esperar a que se muestren en la pantalla. They'll be shown up right there on the monitor in front of you, and I will be reading them for you and the audience. Okay. Oh. How can compliance programs effectively counterattack the slippery slope of ethical erosion, especially when initial transgressions are socially normalized and cognitively rationalized within high-pressure environments?
I think the answer to that really gets down to letting people understand little things lead to big things. You know, that this may look like it's a small singular event, but it's actually a gateway to more. And you need to be careful, though, in not picking out something that is truly trivial, but something that does suggest deeper consequences of it.
Good, thank you. When cases like that of the CEO, Andy Byron, occur, what are the consequences for CEOs and executives, and how can employees be expected to uphold the responsibilities when leadership itself fails to model integrity?
So I think Andy Byron was the one, was at the Coldplay concert? Is that the one? Who was there with the head of HR? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I think the first thing it tells employees is don't go to Coldplay concerts. I think that's actually a great example of when you see how the company reacts is if the company sets rules and policies, it should apply to everyone. And also the senior leadership all the more so. And the board stepping in and ultimately dismissing him, and I think the head of HR resigned, shows great transparency and a great willing to commit to doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient. In that case, it was exceptionally inconvenient because you lost 2 members of the leadership team. Those kinds of things are very instructive. We just saw at Nestle, the CEO there had to step down because of an improper relationship at work. And those kinds of things, as painful as they are to the individuals, have great impact on the organization as a whole. I guarantee you, everyone at Nestle was talking about the fact that, wow, they really do take this stuff seriously. And I think a lot of people were quickly self-reporting relationships after that.
Okay, thanks, sir. We have this one from Genaro Castillo. Okay. Thank you. Despite a company establishes and communicates the organizational values to their employees through the code of ethics, recertification training, what is another effective strategy to increase morale and reinforce values across the organization?
I think the key thing there is making it a part of the conversation. You can't say these are our values and be done with it. The managers need to be prepared to speak to the values, to explain decisions in terms of how the company's values ended up animating in that decision. One of the things I heard recently a compliance team talking about doing is they created a series of cards that they give to managers of ethical dilemmas or examples of things that had happened in the news, like the Coldplay concert incident, as things you can talk to your team about in a minute or two at the start of a meeting, as a way to really make these kind of issues part of the daily conversation, not something that's just done once a year.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. We have another one. Yes, it is. Okay. What indicators or controls can show the level of ethics applied by employees in a company, and how are those indicators generated?
So there's a number of ways. There's a few ways you can go about that. One, a lot of organizations do ethics or culture surveys in their organizations to see what employees' answers are to questions like I would feel comfortable speaking up if I saw an issue. I would talk to another employee about it. The other thing is manager logs. Some organizations not only encourage managers to talk about these things, but they actually require it, that they're supposed to report how often that they've raised ethics and compliance issues in conversations with their employees. I know one organization had a series of metrics, and managers were not bonus eligible unless they could demonstrate that they had addressed compliance and ethics issues a certain number of times in the last year by proactively talking about that with employees at meetings and elsewhere.
All right. Okay, uno. Okay, it could be through conversations, but look at this one. Should we test our employees to identify who might be susceptible to corruption?
I don't know how you would do that short of dropping money all over the office. But the one thing I would say is I would ask the question of how are we making employees susceptible to corruption? Are we, for example, sending employee off to a highly corrupt region of the world without training them on the risk area? Are we setting a goal for them that's not possible to meet unless they do something that they shouldn't be doing? So I think it's more a question of, is management setting up people to fail rather than are we hiring people who are going to fail?
Okay, thank you, sir. And talking about consequences, what disciplinary action have you seen have a positive impact on ethics in an organization?
I think the best example of that is a lot of organizations now publicize wrongdoing. It used to be when an employee was dismissed for wrongdoing, it was quietly done. They were ushered out the building and the organization didn't acknowledge it. Now more and more organizations are sharing these things, putting in newsletters or having discussions about why. They tend to remove the employee's name for obvious reasons, both practical and social. It's not nice to tell about people's names far and wide if they've done something wrong. But to let people know, one, it can happen here. A lot of organizations have a feeling like we're all good people, we wouldn't do these things, and they need to be reminded that it can. As I'm sure you know, when it comes to embezzlement, schools and churches are often the victims because people think we're good people, we're going to do things here, but there's no controls and people do it. So by telling people about it, they can see it happens here, it makes it much more relevant and drives home the point that there are consequences for bad behavior.
Okay, and now talking about whistleblowing, does encouraging the reporting of unethical acts truly have positive impacts on organizations?
I think it does, to the extent that if people can feel comfortable speaking up, they can feel comfortable speaking up about a lot of things. It can help root out problems, but it's also, a speak-up culture is a speak-up culture. It's a place where also somebody can have the courage to say, this process we're doing is inefficient, this one might be better. And there's been plenty of stories where organizations have heard something on the helpline and responded to it. The hard part is there's no reporting of those, so the public doesn't hear about it. But yes, there are plenty of examples.
Okay, and we have a last one, sir. How can the design of codes of conduct and internal policies incorporate behavioral ethics principles to prevent individual rationalizations that justify dishonest behavior, even among well-intentioned employees?
I would say yes, by writing the policies for people, not lawyers. Making it so it's individual, it's relatable to them, so that people understand what it is you want and what their expectations are, and understanding what the consequences, good and bad, are for behavior, and not make it so legal and technical that people lose track of why we're doing it and are just focused on what I have to do.
Okay, con eso cerramos. Thank you so much for your participation here, of course, and
thank you.
All this information. Allow me to give you this. It's a gift on behalf of the IMAE. Thank you, sir, so much. And have a great time in Mexico City. Un fuerte aplauso, por favor, para despedir. Adam Turtletaub. Ok, bueno, pues ahí lo tienen, así cerramos esta primera parte de nuestro encuentro. Ahora es tiempo de la comida. A todos los participantes presenciales y online se les informa que de acuerdo a nuestra agenda vamos a tener este receso de 75 minutos para continuar después. Les recordamos que lo que viene después de la comida es completamente en español, así que por favor sean tan amables de dirigirse a las mesas para devolver los aparatos traductores, las diademas y recuperar su identificación. A quienes están acá se les invita a pasar a los salones Collection 1, 2 y 3, que los van a encontrar frente a este salón de sesiones. Al ingresar a los salones Collection deberán entregar el boleto que les fue proporcionado y que corresponde a los alimentos de este día. Están por fecha, así que por favor les pedimos llevar sus objetos de valor con ustedes, por favor, y dejar en la entrada las diademas. Muchas gracias por su atención, buen provecho, volvemos en un ratito. Provecho.